the nice thing about places, everybody's got to have them. And so our work is to tell people that their well-being is dependent on their relationship to the place they are. Forget about where they work. And if you want to raise your kids, you need neighbors to do that. If you volunteer 100 hours a year, you'll live 2 years longer. And there's something called social prescribing now, where doctors look at me and say, Peter, for you to be healthy, you've got to volunteer 10 hours a week. So all of these say that the place I'm in and the way we connect to each other can produce the life I want to lead.
Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, a show about human environments and how they can be used as a force for good. Conversations that educate and inspire people looking for a different way to do real estate. I'm Neil Collins, and on this episode, I'm joined by Peter Block, a citizen of Cincinnati, author, and a renowned organizational development consultant whose work catalyzes cultural change and brings people together. To begin this podcast, I want to invoke the sentiments from the philosopher Charles Eisenstein, who wrote a book called The More Beautiful Way Our Hearts Know Is Possible. Now, this title has gone on to become a phrase that's shared by many. And I found that the work of our guest today, Peter Block, really goes hand in hand towards the creation of this kind of world. You see, Peter has worked in the realm of organizational development for the past couple decades, working across companies, organizations, community groups, and municipalities to bring people together in order to unlock potential and to create change. I first connected with Peter's work when I came to understand that there is tremendous power embedded within well-crafted generative questions, so much more so than trying to come with solutions. In our world where division is more common than unity, it seems that we're creating identities along divisional lines, and we're gridlocked in making decisions on how we want to live as a society. For me, Peter's work stands out in contrast to this, where he advocates to invite people in and find the commonality in small groups of people by enrolling them in their agency as citizens. Peter's book called Community, The Structure of Belonging has been extremely impactful upon me, and I've witnessed what happens whenever you invite possibility through a generative question. What I didn't know about Peter's work that came out through this podcast is what he thinks about architecture and how he thinks that these physical spaces create divisions within our society, and how he has this desire to see the way that we design and build change in order to bring people and communities together. It is a real treat to have Peter come on to the show and share his thoughts on how our physical structures and the processes that we take to create our world can be redone. And this is in a process that he calls combining architecture with social architecture. Now, before we get into this episode, I want to get into the segment of the show called the Ecosystem Directory Spotlight. This directory is our Rolodex of companies and organizations that are purpose-aligned with the work that we do to bring regenerative projects into life here at Latitude. The directory is how we help people like yourself easily find resources in order to create healthy, resilient, and beautiful homes, habitats, and communities. It can be found on our website at chooselatitude.com/ecosystem-directory. The directory member I want to highlight today is Moretti Design. Moretti is an internationally inspired design studio that creates interiors from the Midwest all the way to France, with a focus on promoting healthy interiors through sustainable and regenerative design principles. Moretti Design harnesses a European sensibility in their work, assuring that every piece and material is carefully selected with intention. The results are timeless, practical, and versatile spaces inspired by their client stories. So, without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Peter Block. And of course, if you like what we're putting out here with the podcast, I would be grateful for your support by subscribing to the show and leaving a rating and review. Okay, here we go. Peter Block, this is an immense pleasure and certainly a conversation that I have been hoping to hold for a long time, mainly because we've used your book, Community, as a resource for company building, culture philosophy. And so it's just a real treat to have you join on this podcast. So welcome.
Thank you. And I love the invitation from you because the word architecture means the world to me and affects everything we try to do. It's powerful. And the community book doesn't do it justice. The recent book I did has a whole section on architecture. And I love the notion that we create buildings and then buildings create us. So if I want to imagine anything in the world to occur or be created, the space that it inhabits is hugely powerful. So to be with you in this conversation is awesome.
I love to start at the beginning. You have a body of work that spans quite a couple different facets. And I'd love to pick up and understand what the threads of those are and really get into, maybe what catalyzed the work that you've been pursuing over the last couple of decades.
I wish it was just a couple of decades. In graduate school, I ran into something called a T group. And it was a circle of 12 people that spent a few days together trying to understand who they were and how they connected to each other. And I was mesmerized by that. And that kind of launched me into consulting and this thing called organizational development, worrying about culture, connection. And that kind of evolved me into caring about the collective, about groups. For a while, it was business and organizational cultures. And then in the 90s, I gave a talk to a bunch of city managers, and I realized they were up to something. They cared about my civic space. I thought all they cared about was roads and electrical systems and governance. But they cared about my civility, my citizenship, who I was. So I kind of switched into the community world halfway through. And I was going to write a book about it because I'd gotten the habits of writing books. You kind of write books to get things off your mind. And then if other people find them interesting, that's a bonus. And my wife suggested perhaps before I wrote a book on community, I should try it. And so I did. I got involved. And early in that process, I read Christopher Alexander, The Timeless Way of Building. And it changed my thinking totally. He talked about a room can be defined by the quality of aliveness. And it occurred to me that's all I had been doing for 20 years was trying to bring a quality of aliveness into a room. And that's when kind of the world of architecture and the world of groups and relationships and dialogue merged for me. And then I became a space cadet. Everywhere I went, I wanted to rearrange the room. Every building I walked into, I either felt welcome or I didn't. Every public space I went into either encouraged us to be together or encouraged us to grandeur and being alone. And so most of my work has been to create an alternative to individualism. And I realized that the narrative is what defines us, the context in which we live. And if we have a narrative of individualism and competition and scarcity and an economics of scarcity, then the common good will be sacrificed. And to me, the world of architecture is a direct line into the common good. Because once we build something, it lasts a long time. And it either serves the common good or it separates us. The move to the suburbs separated us. And I feel there's a lot of energy now to bring us back together, both in the buildings, the space, the land, and how we occupy the buildings. Because it doesn't matter what room I go into, I always have a choice as how to occupy it. And I can remember when I was invited to churches to run community workshops. I'd stand in the front at a podium. The chairs were all bolted to the floor. Everybody's facing forward. And I thought, what am I doing here? I can't break them into small groups. And then I decided, yes, I can. And so it doesn't matter. Even if you're handed a very structured place, you can always inhabit it. And the act of inhabiting it decides who you are in that space. And our challenge is to get citizens to re-inhabit the spaces and stop waiting for someone else's transformation.
We have to pick it up with the transformation piece. And this is really interesting that you're really honing in on the architectural side of things, especially given a context that a lot of our built environment does encourage isolation and separation. We know, or it seems like, there's this feeling of transformation that is in the air. And I think a lot of people are attuning or wanting community, but we don't exactly know how to do that. And we feel like there's these constraints, and then we're looking at hope, like technology. We're just going to solve energy and agriculture and transportation and all this. How do you think that we begin to find that common ground and recognize each other as citizens, as you talk about, rather than even consumers?
Well, it begins with what you just said. It begins with some kind of instinct or longing. The problem was it's too simple. We have such a habits, and here's where the narrative comes in. So to me, a building, a piece of land, a forest, is just an embodiment of the narrative that we're living into. And if we believe in Pharaoh, if we believe in privilege, I can remember working with J&J in the 80s, and I went to the top floor to meet with the senior executives. So that was a big deal for me. I dressed up and wore a tie and everything. And I get to the top floor, and then on the side, there's a golden staircase, even that goes to the very top people. So even above the top floor, there's a higher. And so most of our churches, most of our buildings are designed with privilege in mind, with the corner office in mind. And so that's what we're trying to create an alternative to. And so the narrative is common good rather than privatization. The narrative is connecting with each other is more important than individual excellence. The narrative is we need to cooperate for the sake of learning instead of competing. And so we're trying to reshape the beliefs and story we have about who we are. And what you represent is that who we are people that basically connect with each other. Who we are is there's enough for us all. And who we are is easily shifted into connectedness, and that we can't purchase what we need. You know, the consumer society is much deeper than shopping. Consumer culture says that whatever I need, I can buy. And the illusion of technology is it makes it more convenient to purchase. And where I used to borrow sugar from a neighbor, now I go to a convenience store. And so this is what you're inverting. And I think that once we agree we're here to care for the commons, we're basically looking to care for each other. Then we say, so how do we design a world that aligns with that? And how do we redesign a world that was designed for individualism and excellence and heroes and top management and presidents and all the things that we think will let me off the hook?
Do you see any examples of maybe groups that are really leading in that participatory design process, and what some of those methodologies that they're really taking, and rather than like we have the architect and a developer and they know all and here's the concept and we're going to build it?
Well, you're one of them. But Ross Chapin with Pocket Neighborhoods, I mean, that couldn't be more explicit. It says you put houses together so they can care for each other as well as manage their own privacy. We've had Quaker churches for years where the room is in circles. You can kind of frame it as a room designed as a pyramid with an altar and a place for the professionals to interpret God for me, like a church, or as a design in a circle where we came to see each other. And so you're seeing all kinds of circular cultures. You see circular buildings. You see common spaces that are for habitation and not for, just retreat. You see community-supported agriculture, urban farming. You see community gardens. There's 34 community gardens in Cincinnati, and they're the safest places in the city because whoever runs them watches out for them. And so the library is a communal instinct where the classes are together. If you want to see somebody from a different economic class than you, go to the library. Museums. And so there are these structures. We just have to treat them as if they matter. Right now we thought they were exceptions, and now you're about making them the rule. And it's not just collaborative design. It's also having a kind of intention about how we want to relate to the land.
Can you talk more about that?
Well, John Locke, I don't know when he lived, it was a while ago. He declared that God's will is to economically develop every piece of land to the maximum possible. And if you didn't develop that land for economic well-being, it was a sin against God. And that was the business case for the United States westward expansion. Davy Crockett was a lead explorer for development interests. He wasn't just interested in the great country. And so we're in the Urban Land Institute, all of this, you look down and you say, well, here's 2 acres in my neighborhood. What's the maximum economic value we can extract from that? As soon as you say that, it's over. Next to me, where I used to live, they wanted to build a house. And the lawyer said something powerful to me. He said, if you don't let us build a house here, you've rendered this land useless. And so the shift is to say, well, let's treat the land as it has value. And perhaps we even take it off the market. So there's community land trusts all over the place. We're starting one here in Cincinnati because the escalating price of housing has to do with the land, not the building. So if you make the land, take it off the market, people can buy and sell buildings, but you don't have this unaffordable cities like we have all over the place. It's a long answer. I'm not sure.
I think it's everything to do with my question, because I think it starts with what is our relationship with place. And it's increasingly hard. I find that we've had this exodus out of cities because of COVID and technology, and we all think that we can maybe pick up our lives for 6 months in one place and then go to another place for 6 months, and this is the new normal for many people, or this is the holy grail of we can live anywhere, we can work anywhere. But what does that say about our relationship, and how do we create community if that is the golden standard?
Well, you're going to have to live somewhere. And so why don't we pay attention to wherever we are? And I think people have left the office, not just because it's convenient, but the office is not a pleasant place to be. I think we designed offices so you were easy to watch. And then we realized we can do without the office. But no, the nice thing about places, everybody's got to have them. And so our work is to tell people that their well-being is dependent on their relationship to the place they are. Forget about where they work. And if you want to raise your kids, you need neighbors to do that. You don't need a school. If you want to be healthy, if you volunteer 100 hours a year, you'll live 2 years longer. And there's something called social prescribing now, where doctors look at me and say, Peter, for you to be healthy, you've got to volunteer 10 hours a week because that's good for my health. So all of these say that the place I'm in and the way we connect to each other can produce the life I want to lead, regardless whether I work at home or work on things. And you as an architect, my wish is you and I will partner. I'll be the social architect and you be the physical architect. You could say regenerative architecture is bringing into contact the social architecture, the relational architecture, and the physical space. And how do you make them fall in love with each other, harmonious instead of each fighting the other? Because right now I have a hard time finding places to meet because they're all designed for teaching, lecturing. We have town meetings now and leaders talk. I was in a church the other day on a panel, and they had people, instead of talking to each other, we wrote down questions on cards and passed them to the front. That's to keep control. You know, you go to city council, it's the most alienating room I've ever been in my life. So this is why I need you. I need you to use your leverage, your world, Ross's world, Alexander's world, to say we have to design these rooms to bring people together.
Yeah, I mean, beyond the room, even the process is all designed in a way, maybe in somebody's mind it was around efficiency, but even designing a process to engage the citizenship of public comment is a very rough experience for both the citizen and the developer group. It doesn't matter. It's just a rough process all the way around.
Well, it's designed to centralize control, and it's designed for efficiency and cost and convenience. In my neighborhood, the developer wanted to add a unit with 110 apartments, and everybody's angry. You can't do that. What are you doing? We're residential. And so I was part of convening a group with the developer and citizens early in the process, before they had plans or anything to show you. Once you show somebody something and ask for feedback, it's over. It's too late. Okay. And so we broke people into small groups and said, what do you want from this neighborhood? If we're going to add 110 units, what matters to you? And they talked about space and age and place. And by the end of the conversation, the anger had dissipated. And the developer said, thank you. I can't give you all you want, but this gives me something to pay attention to as we start the process. Where right now, in most places, developers, if you talk to them, they say, oh, it's a nightmare to get citizens involved. And what they do is they get councils involved. Those aren't citizens. People, elected officials, do not represent citizens. They act on what they think is best for citizens. And so it's simple. It took an hour and 20 minutes. 80 people came together, small groups, people you know the least, and give them 4 questions, put them up here at the end. Thank you for coming.
Why do you think developers are, maybe scared is the right word? If I could identify it, why do you think that is?
I don't know. They're too powerful.
The people?
The real estate industry. It's the largest in the country. 70% of the donations to my city council comes from the real estate industry. Now they can only give so much, so they have to create 40 LLCs. Okay, so I don't know. Some of the fear is realistic. Citizens can be crazy. You know, asking people what they want sometimes is very depressing. Welcome to the election year. And so that's a great question. I really don't know, other than the speed in which they move, because it just takes time to engage people, unless you engage them first. Why do you think the development real estate industry is so uneasy about citizen engagement?
The whole process is fraught with challenges because you have, let's say, development, a property that a group has to come in and put up money and do homework and diligence on to figure out what can be built there. And then I think there's a lot of trepidation opening it up to citizens that they could have very different ideas. It could come at the cost of what their profit margins are. And I think there's a deep distrust. And I get it. I've been in community meetings where, there's a lot of infighting. There was no consensus. And I think that's just perpetuated of there's a lot of capital involved. There's a lot of mistrust. And I don't see a lot of people that are really trying to figure out how to work with this, of what does the community want, rather than, we so blindly focus on the project is this parcel, and it's got boundary lines, and this is mine. I have a deed to it. Um, I find it very rare to say that a developer comes in saying the project is the community, but we have the ability to work with this parcel as part of it.
We need a way to build trust, to engage people, and we know how to do that. It's just you have to decide to do it. Because right now, even those meetings, the structure is alienating. You got the developer up front, standing. Some work's been done. You have citizens lined up. And you say, okay, we'd like your feedback. Well, don't structure the room that way. We're architects. We know how to structure things. Put people in small groups and take the developers in small groups and say, here's some questions we have. Here's the limits we're living with. It's space. It's got to have 110 units. It's got to have 4 floors. Let's talk together. And I think the structure of how we gather has an impact. And part of what we do in our work with communities is accelerate trust building. And it's so simple, it's embarrassing. That you get 100 people together and you break them into groups of 3, and you ask them, when did you first start caring about this community? Then you ask them, what's the crossroads we're at as a community? What's the crossroads we're at with respect? What doubts do you have? What are you willing to contribute or invest in to make this property work for both sides? These are all ambiguous, open-ended questions. And if we talk about them together in small groups of 3 or 4, I fall in love with these other 3 people. I realize they're not strangers. They're human beings. And it takes about 30 minutes. That's what drives me crazy, is because we know how to do that. And every time I've been in a setting where we've allowed that process to happen, people leave feeling more trust than when they walked in. And that's a consciousness. See, as an architect, Christopher Alexander tells me that a balcony's got to be 6 feet or larger. He tells me that the room has to have 2 entrances and windows on both sides. He tells me, so he has a pattern language for building something that he says creates quality of life. Well, why don't we do the same for how we gather, for the social architecture? And say, here are the patterns. That's what I've tried to do, is say, here are the protocols. And if you use these protocols, people will leave trusting each other more when they left than when they walked in the room.
Do you find that works best, going back to the developer scenario, the developer as the facilitator, or having a neutral third party?
You need a third party. If the developer has the skills, they can do it. But I'm more interested in the developer being in a small group and finding 3 strangers he can trust, she can trust. And so it's a mixture. The developer can host the meeting, but let a neutral party run it or not. The developers just haven't paid attention to social architecture. That's what you and I are going to do together. We're going to say, look at the social architecture. It has as much to do with the building we create as the physical design work that we're used to. It's just, that's what I mean. It's about a narrative. It's about a level of consciousness. Now, that's not all there is. But we've got co-housing. I mean, there's all kinds of movements. There's all kinds of, like I say, community trusts. There's all kinds of vehicles. There's all kinds of ways to raise capital with local. Right now you have to be an accredited investor. And so what about citizens? Can't they? And so we're creating, those vehicles are out there if we ever decided to use them together.
They're slowly coming about. We now have over 300 community land trusts in the country, but it is a very tedious and challenging process to bring people together for the benefit of the community, to decide that we want to have a diversity of people represented within this community so that it can function and be vibrant. There's just so much pushback that I find from from people that we don't want those kinds of people in this community, and we don't want to contribute our resources or our time to do that. And it's this narrative that's playing out even within a small community like ours, where we have been really adamant trying to bring about more attainable, dignified, quality homes for people that need it the most. But the market just says, this isn't, you can't afford to live here. And so they leave, and the community suffers because of that. And I think that there's a lot of work to continue to figure out how we can make these processes easier.
We have a 90-acre park in my neighborhood, okay? Burnett Woods. 35 people like to hang out there day and night. And they're non-white, and they're a little scruffy. And so how do we get rid of these people? And so here I'm on a local neighborhood council, or was. And I've had an awful time saying, they don't need servicing. We need to find out who they are. And people say, nah. So you're right, it's hard. And so what? And it's doable. I just have to get smarter about it. And what you do is you want to find exceptions on both sides who will work with you. Who are some people from the low income, or whatever you want to call them, uncredentialed people. And how do we get them together and get some developers or citizens who care, and say, how do we invite people in so we get to know each other first and decide what to do second? Get them in a room in small groups of 3 and give them the right kind of questions so they get connected fast. And it's amazing to me, the community people have no consciousness about connecting people. I love the Schumacher Center. So they're heroes to me. They started half the stuff I believe in. They started with land trust and local currency. And yet when they hold a webinar, they had somebody talking to me for 35 minutes and asking me to put my questions in the chat. And I think, stop that. Why don't you break us into groups of 4 and find out who else is in the room? And why don't you join some of those groups? It's really a value in how we come together as important as what we come together for. And I really wrote the last book saying, why do we make how we come together the number one priority? Why don't we make the common good narrative the dominant narrative? And stop paying attention to people in the corner office.
Let's talk about that new book, Peter. What's the name of it?
Activating the Common Good. And the subtitle is the point which the citizens reclaiming control over our collective well-being. And architecture, and churches, journalism is parts of it. But I'm just trying to say how we come together is as important as why we come together. And I've been yelling that, writing that pathetically for a long time. That's why I'm excited when you invite me on a conversation about it. And architects, if they just thought that way, because people want the common good. It's just we're out of the habit, I think. I don't know. I need you to tell me what would work.
I think, a lot of people want that. And we're having to iterate, and we're learning, and we're overcoming this culture. And I think that's what it's all about. I mean, the name of the show is about regenerative real estate, but it's more about what does a regenerative culture look like, and how does that come together from the hardware and the software, however we want to frame this conversation.
Beautiful. Yeah, and regenerative means we're not going to argue against the dominant culture. See, most people who have a vision of something different are mad at what exists now. And so we protest, we walk. That doesn't work. I'm tired of waiting for current people in the corner office to change their mind. Why don't we just create the alternative? The regenerative means is to give life to an alternative culture. Regenerative environment, regenerative build, is to bring life into. It's not to stop what's going on now. And once we decide to bring life into by what we create, in a building, a place, a room, a way of being together, a language, then if we can each do that, that creates something big. But the whole idea is to stop protesting like we do. I go to protests about poverty or architecture, whatever, and as a panel, I'm on the panel half the time. And we sit and listen. They inspire us, motivate us, and say, thank you for coming. I need to meet the other people in the audience. And that's why I frame the book as I'm not arguing against the business perspective, cost, efficiency, speed, convenience. I'm arguing for a common good perspective. And let's create that together. And it's going to be small. And it's going to be slow. So what? And if I can create that within reach, within walking distance, then we're creating it together in the world. And we'd stop having summits, stop calling our meetings as if it's people at the top. The people at the top, I want you to join us, but I don't want you to run us. And partly it's because they're trapped. The president, the head of real estate, the developer, they're imprisoned by other people's expectations. So you're a community organizer in the name of regenerative communities, regenerative culture. And there's a lot of alignment. It's just I need you to pull together, and make the call. Because the call is best if it comes from an unexpected place. And if you say, okay, regenerative architecture, we're going to call people together in ways they aren't used to being together, something will happen. And then at the end of the first meeting, you say, would you come back to one more meeting? That's all I want. And we've taken that all kinds of places. We've done it with strategic planning for cities. And we got 200 people together and broke them into small groups and said, why do you care about Covington? What concerns you about Covington? What do you care the most? The housing, the school? Fine. Break into those groups. And then we say, well, what's your contribution to what you don't like? Nobody asked that question. So citizens come to protest. We went to a safety meeting. Somebody got shot. And I said, thank you for coming. Would you break into small groups? I happen to be running the meeting. Would you break into small groups and with people you know the least and talk about when did you first start caring about Clifton Heights? What's your contribution to the fact you're not as safe as you want to be? That's a hell of a question. But in asking you what's your contribution to the very thing you came to change, I'm treating you as if you're an agent, accountable for the future. So to be regenerative means that each of us is accountable and an agent in creating a future we want to inhabit. And that's both with the physical space and the relational space. So I'm calling this relational activism.
Peter, how do you come up with the frames of these questions? I mean, there's so much latent potential that can come out of bringing a question like that to a small group of people.
Thank you. It's a statement you made. Over time, you look for questions that people can't escape from. No matter how you answer, you're guilty. And I don't ask you about your opinions. I don't ask you what the needs are, what the deficiencies are. I want to know what role are you existing and playing in the place that you care about. If you came in the room, it means you care about something. Don't tell me your wife forced you to come. You know how to say no to her. And that's the mindset. So you look for those questions that have accountability built into the question. And you never talk about deficiencies or needs. Because what you pay attention to is what you get. And if I focus on needs, focus on danger, focus on violence, focus on then that's what I'll get. And so, there's some architecture to the questions. You know how to design a room and a porch, and a second floor and a sight line. Well, the same thing with questions. And you find when it works and you stick with it for life.
I'd love to hear an example, and it certainly doesn't have to come from the built environment, of how that can work to maybe harmonize a lot of conflict within a group. I'm sure you've got plenty of stories of going into communities and groups like this.
Exactly. You go in not doing anything about the conflict. You say, we came here to decide what we want to create together. We didn't come here to talk about what's wrong with the place. And so there's a Finneytown school system. So schools are the same thing. The architecture of the school is mostly for social control. Lines of students, teachers standing up. I know you do a grading system. As soon as I went to school, I realized I had to compete with my friends. And the more they failed, the easier my B was to achieve. And so you get people in the school together and say, what's the crossroads you're at in the school? What is it about this school that you care about? What's the gift you have that you haven't fully brought? And we do this with kids that aren't making it in the school. So we get the parents and the kids together, and if kids are having a fight, we sit them down and we say, what's your contribution to the difficulty you're having? We have them reverse, there's all kinds of stuff once you get them in the room. Now, some people don't want that. And you say, thank you, but don't leave the room. So you get citizens together arguing about this development in my neighborhood. You say, if you think this is baloney, this is a bunch of touchy-feely crap, small groups, I agree with you, but would you stay here and join a small group? Just don't say anything. And so my context is, I'm not going to treat you as the other. And I'm not going to talk about what we want to argue about. And I don't ask your opinions. I ask you what you want. What do you want to create? I'm asking you, what doubts do you have? I ask you, what's the crossroads you're at? I ask you, what are the gifts? What's the promise you're willing to make? Very specific questions. And stay away from all the arguments. I don't care about how you see the world. When I'm alone, it may drive me crazy, but that's not what I came for. And so you can design these rooms, buildings. So in this school, they have a restorative practice room with chairs. And so a kid gets in trouble in a classroom, they don't kick him out. They say, would you come to a conversation? They have a teacher and kids and parents. Let's talk about what's going on. And they get personal. What's it feel like for you when you walk in that room? And people realize connection is the point. And so we did it. We've done it with strategic planning. We do it with budgeting. We do it with design a school. The most important people in the school are the janitors and the bus drivers. They have as much to do with raising the kids as the teachers do, parents do. All these little structures we can redesign so that everybody feels connected, seen, and accountable. That's the goal. I get excited about the thought that the building, the room, the shape. I was on the company, and I walked in their office, and there's a big desk there with somebody's peeking over the top, which says to me, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I said to Rob, why don't you get rid of that desk and put them in a... And they did, and it changed your whole experience. Now you walk in, and the first room in the offices are the kitchen, which is a place of welcome, a kitchen table, instead of a lobby that says you don't belong here. So to me, the space carries 1,000 powerful messages about who we are together.
And this is the work. This is the powerful work.
How is this sounding to you, Neil? How is this striking you?
Deeply resonant, of just the ways in which we even practice. It makes me think about the questions that we like to ask with our clients, how we've oriented our own office space, how we facilitate even digital meetings. One of the things that we've really picked up on of your work over the last several years is the power of inviting and enrolling, and what that really means, and how to work with that of who are you inviting by way of who are you not inviting as part of that. And one part of me is very overwhelmed by this level of intention needs to be multiplied and cast out into every facet of our society. but at the same time, it seems like our culture is, at least the culture that I spend a lot of time in, is already going in this direction, and we're seeking. But sometimes we certainly don't have the answers.
Well, thank you. And it is, if it's not overwhelming, you're not paying attention. Okay. It is, and that's why you want to operate everything you can, every place within reach. All I can do is say that whatever room I'm in, metaphorically, or this is a room, I can show up in a way that invites something other than what God is here. And the invitation is important, because in the invitation it says, if you come, something will be asked of you. Okay, we're going to talk about this space, this room, this park, this school, this hospital, but we're going to be asking you to participate in deciding what we're creating here. And then you structure it so that angry people don't get a voice. They can speak up, but not, speak to the room. And sometimes you get people that are just they've gone too far. And I'll ask him, I said, they'll give a speech. And I say, have you said that before? He says, yeah, I say it everywhere I go. Thank you. And the other sentence that changed my life after Christopher Alexander told me that my life's only purpose was to create a quality of aliveness. You just see what you can do with where you are. But your practices, you're right. How you shape the office, how you shape your calls, how you shape each thing can carry with it that aliveness means people have choice, means people can be responsible for things that don't work. It means people have gifts, and people can make covenants with each other. And so why don't we just focus on that and make what we came to create secondary, make the primary one everything you're talking about. And you take it where you go. Kids in school take it there, parent-teacher night. It's ridiculous. They sit me down in a chair in a classroom that I have nothing but bad memories about. They treat me like a child, where what I really need is to meet the other parents, because the kids are well connected to each other. We're not. And so it doesn't matter where you go now. Half the places you go, you have no chance to shift it. And you just hold your breath and pray.
That was one thing that we found moving to this community, is that we went through a long walk through the woods and came across this clearing with this beautiful, immediately recognizable school, wood, or just very organic shapes. And we came back and Ross had asked us, where did you go today? I said, we found this beautiful school in the woods. Do you know it? I said, of course, I designed it. And we drove home to Portland a day later, and there's a school right around the corner from our house. And we have a young child, and so that's the neighborhood school that he'd be going to. But it really dawned on us that it could be a school, it could be a hospital, or it could be a jail. And everything signals this is institutional. And it was that kind of illuminating factor of, wow, design certainly matters in how we want to design our life for our child. And that's where I think we really owe it to ourselves to examine how we're designing these conversations, how we're designing the meetings, how we're going and doing this. And I appreciate the fact that, if we're not overwhelmed, then we're not paying attention, because that is the grief that I think a lot of us are holding. It feels like there's a lot of trauma behind it. And that's where I settle on.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That's where I have to be careful who I pay attention to. And if I pay attention to people in the corner office, it gets depressing. And if I say, well, I wish somebody else ran this, superintendent, president, whatever. So I have to stop doing that and say, well, we're going to decide what kind of world we want to create for our child. And so just stop. Otherwise, the dominant culture becomes overwhelming. It's very complicated. That's why the room matters. That's why what you're doing with the architecture word matters, because you're trying to find ways of bringing people together that will lead them to create invitational spaces for the inhabitants, not for the creator and designer. Spaces where there's every step of the way is welcoming, where the circle is invited. Get rid of conference tables.
I love this. Yes. This quality of aliveness that you're talking about. I think the biggest challenge that we're finding, especially using these words of regeneration, that within the design world, people are taking it to mean circularity and energy and plants and all amazing things. Don't get me wrong, right? Like, we can design and engineer beautiful circular buildings and neighborhoods, but it is very short on the social fabric of which you're really touching on, of what is the aliveness within a community or a group.
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't feel like we've been able to fully translate yet.
Well, partly your industry thinks they're done when the place is built. So I'll give you another example. It's called dividend housing. So there's a group in Cincinnati that takes low-income people and gets a place with 10 or 15 units in it. And they say, if you help us manage this place, you save us enough money that we'll give you a bonus. And so at the end of 5 years, and they come to a meeting once every 10 days or 2 weeks, they talk about who will care for this part of the property, who will decide who's welcome, who will watch out for our safety and cleanliness. At the end of 5 years, they've saved the landlord $5,000 apiece. And so we'll give you $5,000 of equity. And it's called wealth creation for low-income people. And so we have all these people building low-income housing, affordable housing, okay? But then they build it, and it doesn't change the social structure of who inhabits it. And so what you will do as you gather the world around this regeneration, you'll say that we want to not only build the place, but we want to help people inhabit it in a communal and collective way. And that's why all the low-income housing is such a nightmare. They're prisons. They're done cheaply. This is where hip-hop came from, right? It came from the New York City in the 50s. The housing was so deadly. And so that's exciting. The social architecture and the physical architecture become one and the same thing. We know how to do that. We just haven't decided to, or we haven't found each other. I go doing my little small group stuff, and you do your architecture stuff. It's one and the same thing. That's what excites me about talking to you, and Ross, and the co-housing people, and the land trust people. But we know as much about inhabiting a room as we know about designing it. Why don't we make that one thing?
Peter, this has been an absolute pleasure to spend this time with you. I'm going to plug your books, and I don't think it really matters which one, because I've got, for people that can't see us in person here, I've got Community, the Structure of Belonging. And I kid you not, Peter, I think every page has got so many highlights on it.
I should look at that. I have no idea what works and what doesn't.
A lot of it works. It is beautifully written. I look forward to getting into your latest book that you just wrote.
No, thank you. The books changed my life. I didn't write a book till I was 40. And somebody harassed me. I was giving talks. Write a book. No, write a book. No, finally I gave in. And then the book did well. And I thought, what's going on here? And then I wrote another one that did well. And I thought, well, maybe my ideas are worth something. And maybe I can write. So it took me 45, 50 years. And now the blessing of it is that I don't have to be there for you to engage the ideas. Thank you very much. It's sweet what you're saying.
Thank you.
It means a lot.
Thank you.
If you want to follow our work at Latitude, you can follow us on Instagram at latitude.regenerative.re, and mine is at I am Neil Collins. We inherently believe in the potential that comes from connecting value-aligned and purpose-driven people together in community. That's why I encourage you to join our mighty network and introduce yourself to the other people working across the globe to advance a more regenerative, resilient, and beautiful world. Here, we want to know what you're working on and what inspires you. Through this platform, you can attend live events, take courses provided by our podcast guests, and create connection with other people and businesses that share your same passion. To join, find the link in our show notes or visit our website at chooselatitude.com. If you'd like to support the show, please share it with your friends and be sure to follow us on your podcast app so that you always have the latest episode downloaded. Another way to support our regenerative field building is to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Positive ratings help attract amazing guests, and they can be the deciding factor for someone else to tune in and listen. And who knows? Maybe this is the kind of motivation that it takes for them to finally decide to align their profession with their sustainable and regenerative values and become a positive force for good within their own community. This show was produced by myself and edited by Anthony Wallace and offered as a part of our work with Latitude Regenerative Real Estate.